Hello, it is I, the poofy-haired professor, back for another video tutorial. Today, we're going to learn about oil paint. What makes it different than acrylic? Is one better than the other? When I was just a wee lad starting out in life with painting, I thought, oil paint. Everyone talks about oil paint. That's gotta be like the real artistic medium. And at some point, I found out that acrylic, or at least somebody told me that acrylic paint is pretty much the same as oil. There's not a big difference. And they have glaze mediums that you can mix into it that make it kind of this, not really that big of a difference. So I thought, hey, acrylic's way easier to clean up. It doesn't have like as many smells. I'm just gonna paint with acrylic. It dries faster so that I can let this part dry and work on it and do different things. And so for a long time, I switched over from oils to acrylics, many years. But eventually, as my eye developed, as my ability to see the difference between little details and that were made oil paint different than acrylic, I started thinking, maybe there is a difference. And I eventually switched back to oil paint. So I'm gonna show you guys a little bit about the difference, not only in how you mix the different medium, but what it looks like when you apply it. So here are a few different oil paintings that I've been working on recently. Some kind of landscapes, and they're like landscapes and, a few close-ups with these ones are sort of like these autumn leaves. And that one back there, a little more experimental, got some drips and drabs and splashes. That one's something called a sugar bush. Anyway, you can see that I put a lot of really heavy oil on here, and it looks very wet. And in fact, it is a little bit wet still. So I touched it earlier just to see, and it a little bit got on my fingers, which is, oil paint's not that easy to get off. So it is messy. That's one of the downsides of it. It's sticky, it's hard to clean. But even after it dries, this sheen should still stay there. And that is one of the big differences. For instance, this one maybe looks wet in certain places, but this one is actually dry, so I can touch this one. There's nothing wet on it. But that's kind of the cool thing of oil paint is, I guess, that sheen, that shine, the oily look. That one's a little more dry, so you don't quite see so much of it there. This is my studio. It's kind of messy right now. Artists aren't always known for being neat and clean, and unfortunately, I do sometimes fall into that stereotype. But anyway, let me show you a little bit about the different kind of materials that we use for oil paint. First off, we need, well, the paint, right? So these are a bunch of different oil paints. These are oil paints I've gathered throughout my whole life as an artist. I've got a pretty good collection. Some of these are so old that they date back, like this one dates back 20 years. A dog bit this one. As you can see, it's kind of messed up, but there's still good paint in there. That's how I know this is that one from 20 years ago, because it's the one that the dog chewed on. Anyway, you need the paint, right? Oil paint. The next thing you need is oil. So this is linseed oil. Linseed stand oil. It means it's a little bit thicker than the usual oil. Obviously, you need brushes, something to mix your paint in. I have wax paper for my palette. You need something, some kind of a palette. Palette knives are a nice thing to have for mixing the paint. And I got down here, I got a lot more different kind of brushes. Oh, here, let me show you. There's also, if you don't want to use linseed oil, there's this thing called Galkid, which is sort of like a synthetic version of linseed oil. Here's a different kind of linseed oil I have. Very very, oil paint stuff gets very dirty very quick. But this is the thing that I really need to show you, which is called, well, it's paint thinner. Sometimes we call it turpentine. Sometimes they call it mineral spirits. But if you're, you need it to clean your brushes. You know, when it comes time to clean those brushes, you need this. And you also use it to cut down the paint and thin it down. So instead of, like we would use water for acrylic, instead of water, we use paint thinner to thin down the paint for oil paint. But if you're going to get it, get the odorless kind, because they used to not have, well, I used to not see the odorless kind. I have this this one in here it's an old tahini jar that I used for my turpentine, and that one actually is not odorless, and I made the mistake of opening it recently, and the fumes just about knocked me out. They're so powerful and strong, so you definitely want to get the odorless variety. Okay, let me show you.
All right, so we've got the palette here, and here I'm putting on some white paint because I'm gonna do some little sort of, I've got these red sort of raspberry flower things, and I'm gonna try to make some little seeds basically, and I need some white for that, so I'm mixing up the white with the red to make a lighter pink. And I mixed a little bit of that linseed oil in there to make it a little more fluid. Otherwise the paint can be it's too thick just as it is. Here I am adding the turpentine. So I want this one to be even more sort of flowy and fluid, and I'm adding that turpentine there. All right. Now I want a pink that's lighter because I've got 3 shades of pink. They're all the same. So I'm gonna make one that's like my lightest, one that's sort of in the middle, and then that darker one. So here's my middle pink here. Make sure that that's all mixed up real good. Get a little bit more of the turpentine so that it sort of mixes together better. And there's my lightest version. Now it is technically better to do this with a palette knife. My palette knives are all kind of dirty, so I'm just using the brush right now. For a palette knife to be really effective, you can't let the paint dry on the palette knife, and I've got a bunch of dry paint on my palette knife, so I'm gonna need to. Oh, here I am adding some stand oil, so the thickest linseed oil that I have. I want to thicken this back up and make it really glossy. So that's what I'm doing here. Putting a little bit more of that white into that so that it will be a little different from the original pink. And I'm trying to warm it up by adding that cadmium red. Now I'm kind of gonna try to put a little bit of that cooler red in. Okay, so I'll just go ahead and let it roll a little faster here. And what I'm doing is I'm trying to give it a little more shape to all this messy, flowery, painty stuff that I put on before. I'm just giving it a little bit of shadow on the bottom and light on the top. Just trying to define these individual little strands of sort of raspberry flowers or whatever they are here. I was trying to give this impression of these things being sort of like, you know, dripping with juice. It does look a little bit bloody now that I think of it, which is kind of gross, but you know, oh well. So anyway, trying to define them more. Hopefully you can see that I put more light on the top. Light is usually falling from the top, a little more shadow on the bottom. Trying to pull these things into being individual little clusters and clumps, and putting kind of, you know, just more shadow on the bottom, making a blend where the shadow and the light sort of come in. And now I'm at the point where I'm using that light pink that I mixed, and I'm making those sort of little raspberry seeds on here, and trying to find the right Oh gosh, my camera got a little too far to one side here, didn't it? I think I fixed that at some point. Anyway, yeah, just putting those little raspberry seeds on there. Let's see. Now I'm trying to mix the intermediate zone a little bit more. Okay, so that's pretty much, well, I'll leave it here for now. And this one I think came out better. I like this one better for my raspberry jam. It's kind of messy. It's kind of messy. Here's another one where I've got this texture on these leaves, fallen leaves that are sort of, you know, decomposing on the forest floor. And I just thought I'd show you sort of what you can do with these multiple layers of sort of transparent layers and all the texture and this sense of that you're kind of looking through something, you know, different transparent layers of color and texture. Obviously, this is a different painting. But anyway, let's take a look at acrylic now.
Okay, so this is acrylic paint, and it's a bit like oil because, well, it's thick like oil paint. It has a similar sort of thickness and consistency, but acrylic uses, well, it's sort of almost a kind of a plastic, and it's a different kind of material than the oil. So it uses water. Instead of paint thinner. And if you want that shine, you can use a gloss medium. So I've got a Liquitex gloss medium here. There's a few other things you can use for acrylic. Flow improver is basically the same thing as water. Supposedly it spreads out the paint a little more evenly. And then a slow drying medium. If you don't like how quickly acrylic dries, because you actually want to be able to mix on the canvas a little longer, the slow drying medium can help for that. So let's go ahead and see what it's like to mix some of this paint. My goal here is I'm gonna try to paint in the tops of some of these buildings that I'm working on. This is the Las Vegas skyline, a commission that I'm doing. So, like I was saying, these paints that we got from Calca are also acrylic, just like these. This blue is very similar to what's called ultramarine blue. The quality might not be quite as high in this one. Let's see. You can kind of see it, how it looks where the paint gets thin, as opposed to here where the paint thins out. It's a little, well, it's still thicker where it thins out, right? So that's ultramarine. And then I've got a cerulean blue here, which actually, maybe the one that Calca sent us is more like a cerulean blue. A little more like that, maybe. So, let's see, let me get a little white, or let me put this down, not quite white. And, all right, so let's see, what do I want to mix? I think I'll do something for these. Probably want to get a little bit of this black, make some sort of a gray base. Something like that. And let's see, what color do I want for the sky? My daughter's looking at it. Put a little bit of that blue in there. Probably want it to be even lighter than this. This is not light enough. That's a little bit better. Something like that. Yeah, that looks good. All right, so now what I have right here is I have my color. But I want to add some gloss to it. So like I was saying, we have this gloss medium. I can just put some in there. Like that. And then I have to mix it in. This will extend the color too, so now I have more of it, which is good. And now if I want to add some of the slow drying medium, I can. Maybe just a little bit. There, not too much. And so these are the steps that you would take for acrylic. Now remember, the difference here is that this would be the stand oil, and when you're painting with oil paint, it's the stand oil. Now this is, you know, different medium. I prefer to use a square brush for this kind of stuff, but I don't really have one on hand, so I'm gonna try this other brush, see how it goes. Gotta get more of it. Gotta get a nice thick kind of coverage up here. Yeah, see, if I had a square brush, I could flatten out these areas, which I kind of want to do. Yeah, I'm gonna go get a square brush. When you are using acrylic, you want to always soak your brushes when you're not using them, because soak them in water, because if I let this dry out, this will turn into a hunk of plastic. It ruins the brush and you can't use it anymore.
All right, so here I am painting the skyline, but I don't like the blue that I've mixed here. Oh, well, I guess I should mention how I'm trying to be really clean along the edges here. It's the edge that I care about. The inner part here, you see I'm just smoothing it out, but I really want a clean, clear edge. Anyway, I don't like that color. It wasn't, well, it wasn't blue enough. It got a little too dull. So I'm just gonna add in a little more of the pure blue pigment to try to get it a little more chromatic, a little less dulled down. And let's see if that looks any better. I don't know. A little bit of water, mix it up, get a little more fluid so that it can get that sharp edge that I'm looking for. And yeah, I'll just experiment over here and see. Yeah, see, this blue is a lot closer to that original blue that the buildings were. So I like this one better. I run into a little bit of trouble here because this brush that I'm using isn't really stiff. The bristles aren't stiff enough. They're too soft, so they're too bendy. They don't retain their shape enough, and so it's hard to get those sharp, hard edges that I'm looking for because of that. And I get a lighter version now. But as you can see, you know, it's very similar in consistency, but the medium that we're using is not oil or turpentine, it's all just water. And now my camera's pointed at the wrong area. How fun. I'm trying to lighten up what I did here and try to change the hue a bit. All right, let's just speed it up and get this over with. It's been fun. I hope you've learned a bit about what acrylic and oil can do. Have fun experimenting.